This pot used to hold my olive tree. I know, it's ridiculous to have an olive tree in Finland, but I didn't have the heart to explain to the person who bought it for me that, in fact, in order to keep the thing alive through winter, I had to buy it its own sun lamp. But regardless, the pot is what I actually want to talk about because it is a ceramic pot. It's made from clay. It's got a glazed bottom part and an unglazed top part, and it's reasonably waterproof. Clay is one of the most versatile materials we have. Pottery developed independently across the world in multiple different cultures in multiple different ways. And it served many, many purposes within our world. It held water, it held food. It was used as a material in which to write, as a means to preserve the past. And that is one of the reasons why archaeologists get so giddy every time that they find a new pottery shard, because they can put those pottery shards together and build a picture of the past. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. Not archaeologists building a picture, but you using ceramics to build a picture of your world and how to use it to build cultures that feel as rich and as real as our world's cultures. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. This video is sponsored by World Anvil, a set of world building tools that helps you create, organize, and store your world setting. Today we're talking about ceramics, which is a kind of technology. World Anvil has a great template for technology articles. It's got questions like discovery, access, availability, utility, and manufacturing. I built out porcelain as a technology in my world using this template, and it really helped me bed down the use of porcelain in the Empire of Lumiaron. You can check out my world in World Anvil, and if you want to use World Anvil for your own world, you can sign up for free. If you're ready to get rid of the ads, you can use my link to get a 10% discount on an annual subscription. Check it all out at the link below. Okay, let's get cracking. First, let's talk about the basics of pottery. So, pottery in its most basic form doesn't even require a kiln. It just requires clay, water, and a fire. You gather your clay, which you can get from a riverbed or from a mountainside. It's basically just sand that clumps together when it gets wet. You add water to it, you mix it up, and you put it into the shape that you want it to take. So you could put it into this bowl shape, as I've got over here, or you could put it into like a more flat shape, like this little bowl that I've got. I use these to hold dips for chips. Or you could make it into a clay tablet onto which you plan to write or draw pictures. Once you've got your clay formed, you then let it dry out so that it becomes quite hard, but it's not yet fire hardened. After that, you apply heat. So now you would think you need a kiln, but you don't. You can put the piece of pottery next to a fire where the heat will eventually give it that fire hardened feeling and reduce its porosity, its leakage, so that it can hold something like water. But if you really want to make it waterproof, you can, after you've dried it at the fire, you can apply something like beeswax to make it more fireproof. Or you could do what the ancient Mayans did, and when you've still got the wet clay, you could use a smooth river stone and run it over the clay. And then when it dries, that smoothness that's created by the stone will actually increase the retention of water in that pottery vessel. Our oldest known figurine that we know of is a woman with large breasts and a big rear end that we found in Central Eastern Europe. But and that figure is 25,000 years old. But we find new bits of pottery every year. So it could be that we can find even older pieces of pottery in different parts of the world. You can also make pottery in different colors, even the basic pottery. It doesn't have to be glazed to take colors. The ancient Mayans had a color they call Mayan blue. It has weathered so well that even today, long after the fall of their civilization, it still retains its color. Mayan blue was made from organic and inorganic constituents, basically indigo dyes derived from the leaves of the anil plant and combined with palygorskite. I hope I got that somewhere close to the pronunciation. Palygorskite, a natural clay that you find in Mesoamerica. So you can also have different cultures have different colors based on the type of clay that they have available to them. And we'll speak more about different clay types when we talk about porcelain, because there, different clay types really come into play. But one of the types of pottery that I really want to talk about in this kind of more basic pottery is terracotta. So terracotta comes from the Italian word for baked earth, and it's basically literally any kind of fired clay. So any clay object that has been hardened by fire. It's pretty coarse, it's often quite porous, and its color ranges from dull ochre to red, and it's usually left unglazed. It's cheap, it's versatile, and it's durable. It is the most common of the pottery types between different cultures. Almost all cultures have invented some variant of terracotta, independently of each other. And because of the limited colors, this creates quite a similar look and feel between the cultures. So you could be forgiven for thinking, the Greeks and the Mayan cultures might have had something to do with each other because their terracotta pottery looks so similar. But it's actually highly unlikely that they had anything to do with each other. It is simply that this is such a common attribute. And that means that in your culture, in your communities across your world, there is an extremely high chance that your cultures have developed terracotta pottery. So what do your cultures use terracotta for? Let me know in the comments below. In our world, famously, they have made some of the most amazing grave goods, in that there was a Chinese emperor who made an entire terracotta army to accompany him into the afterworld, and it was buried within his tomb. It is one of the most stunning artworks you can ever see, and it's not that the materials are so fine, it's that there are so many of them. And the labor involved in making these soldiers is an incredible flex of the wealth of the man who is buried in that tomb. And if you enjoyed that conversation about the basics of pottery, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about glazing. So I mentioned that glazing can be added to pottery. Now what glazers do is they make pottery more waterproof. So those little bowls of mine have got glazing on them, my pot's got glazing on the bottom, and so on. It also makes the pottery harder and shinier and allows you to paint different colors onto it and then preserve those colors within the glazing. Glazing gets amalgamated on a pottery item when it is placed in a kiln at high temperatures. So when you have glazed pottery, it immediately implies that your culture's technology level is advanced enough to have kilns, because you have to raise the temperature so high. You can no longer just dry the pottery in the fire. You have to actually have a kiln and the high temperatures that go with it. So what types of glazing would people have had access to in a pre-modern era? Ash glazing was very popular in East Asia. It is made from plants and wood ash, and it also contains potash and lime and has natural acidic tendencies. feldspathic glaze. I'm sorry, these names are very unusual for me, so I'm trying my best. Check the whiteboard if you want to see how these words are spelled. So feldspathic glaze contained tectosilicate minerals and is used on porcelain. It comes in pink, white, brown, grey and blue colors. Lead glazes were shiny and transparent after firing. They come both in plain and in colored forms. For a long time, they were the most commonly used glade in China, the Mediterranean, and Europe because of that high translucency. Salt can also be used as a glaze, common old salt. It creates a translucent, glossy, and orange peel-like texture on top of the pottery. You can throw it straight into the kiln at a high temperature during the firing process and it creates the glaze. It mostly comes out either colorless, brown, blue, or purple, but you should remember that salt can be very expensive in a pre-modern world because salt mines induce blindness in miners. So until you have machines and so on that enable people to mine salt safely, salt can be quite expensive. So a salt glaze could actually be substantially more expensive then than it would be now. And then, of course, there are tin glazes. So these glazes actually played a central role in Islamic pottery because they provide a shiny and opaque surface that creates the right background for enhancing bright paints used for decorations. Tin glazed pottery is simply lead glazing, but combined with oxide. Okay, so those are the glazes that you can apply to pottery to make it harder, shinier, and start adding some art to it. So hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the discussion about glazes, and let's talk about porcelain. So here is my cat enjoying the porcelain in my bathroom. I swear she sleeps there all by herself. She chooses to sleep in the basin. I have no idea if she wants a bath. But porcelain is actually a ceramic made from kaolite, and it must be made in a kiln because the temperatures have to be raised between 1200 to 1400 Celsius. That's 2200 to 2600 Fahrenheit for the Americans. It makes an extremely strong and translucent ceramic due to the process of vitrification. Vitrification is the progressive partial fusion of clay through the firing process. And what it does is it actually strengthens the proportion of your glassy bonds in the clay ceramic item. So it makes the porosity lower, the porosity being the rate at which the vessel loses water, for a kind of loose definition. So porcelain really contains water very well, and in fact it can contain boiling water without cracking, which of course was enormously beneficial when making things like tea. So there are, broadly speaking, 3 types of porcelain. Bone china is made from bone ash, feldspathic material, and kaolin. It is described as a ware with a translucent body. Bone china is the strongest of the porcelain or china ceramics, and it has a very high mechanical and physical strength and chip resistance. Because of this, you can make thinner cross sections. So you can make porcelain items out of bone china that is pretty much translucent. Like if you hold it up like this, you can see your hand through a thin enough sheet of bone china. So this can result in a ceramic cup that is almost like glass. And of course, the thinner the sheet and the stronger the bone china, probably the more expensive it is, and the more it's a wealth flex of your noble or your merchant to produce this bone china and serve his guests tea with it or wine with it or whatever he's serving on the given day. Bone china is, however, fairly rare and, as I said, pretty expensive. You also get hard paste porcelain, also called true porcelain. Now, this is a compound of the feldspathic rock and kaolin. It is fired at around 1400 degrees Celsius, and it has been made in China since the 7th or the 8th century. It is the most common type of Chinese porcelain. So when trade with China started, check out my overland trade route video in the information card, porcelain was one of the most sought after items from China, especially because, of course, it was hard to transport. I mean, it does break and it has to be transported a long way. In fact, in the West, in Europe, porcelain was called white gold due to the commanding price it could get from nobles and merchants and so on who really loved this stuff. So, of course, there became in Europe a drive to find a way to make porcelain in the West so that they didn't have to travel all the way to China to go get it and so that they could keep the money at home. This led to the discovery of soft paste porcelain. This is not a true hard porcelain. It does not require the high firing temperature. It does not require the special material. It basically consists of clay, often ball clay, and other ground glass, bone ash, soapstone, flint, and quartz. And it looks kind of like porcelain. It's glossy and it's white, but it doesn't have that strength of porcelain, and you can't make it as thin. However, Europe did eventually figure out how to make porcelain, and therein lies a tale and a half. So it's a real-life Rumpelstiltskin story. Augustus the Strong, who was a German Kaiser, imprisoned an alchemist called Johann Friedrich Bottger, and he told this dude to make gold. Not porcelain, gold. But Johann Friedrich Bottger was far more interested in porcelain, so he started experimenting with the clay available to him in his prison, and he had minerals brought in to try and experiment with it and so on. The Kaiser got kind of annoyed by the fact that he wasn't making progress on his quest to find gold, so he sent a physicist called Ehrenfried Walther von Zierehaus to oversee the work of Bottger. And together, they figured out how to make true hard porcelain with the clays available in Europe. Obviously, it's not Chinese porcelain, but it is the same kind of material because all they needed was the right kind of minerals to add to the clay in order to create a substance that forms that hardness under the firing process. That put the porcelain manufacturing firmly in Germany, and a factory started in Meissen. Now, in 1719, an arcanist named Samuel Stolz escaped from Meissen and went to Vienna, where he sold the secret of porcelain to the Italians, and from there it spread all over Europe. And if you enjoyed that discussion about porcelain, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about the use of ceramics. So, as I said, ceramics can be used to boil water without cracking. So, of course, tea or coffee could be a thing that you boil in ceramics. Now, especially in porcelain. Now, you can also use glass for the same purpose, and if you'd like me to, I can discuss glass as well. Let me know in the comments below if you'd be interested in a conversation about how to use glass in a fantasy world. Of course, you can also use ceramics for things like crockery and cutlery, and when you do that, don't forget to put images on it and to put some writing on it and things like that and build that out as part of your culture. Indeed, one of the most interesting things that I found when I was researching this topic is that there have been writings found on the Mayan pottery that actually say what the thing was used for. So there's this plate of Mayan art that people were like, oh, it's just an artwork, but it's not. It says, when they finally deciphered the writing on the edges of the plate, it says, this plate is used to serve venison tamales. And they found a container that had written on the top of it, it said, this cylinder was used to store cacao. And when they analyzed the contents of it, the remaining powder of the cylinder that was still stuck to the lid and so on, they found that it had cacao traces in it. So literally the Mayans labeled their ceramics, but they made it look all arty. So, there's like an image of a dude taking a gift of tamales and so on. But like there's this label around the edge. Just in case you forgot, this plate is the venison tamale plate. This cylinder is the cacao cylinder, and don't you mix them up. Which I thought was just fantastic. Anyway, so it can definitely be containers, it can be cooking devices, it can be crockery and cutlery. Ceramics can also be art. The Dutch make these tiles that have got artwork on them. You can also make little statues out of ceramic. As I spoke about that ancient statue that we found, that's religious iconography made from clay. You can also use ceramics to make musical instruments. The Mayans had this musical instrument that you put water in, and it made a sound when you tilted it one way, and it made a different sound when you tilted it another way. And it was either a musical instrument or it was something to imitate a certain bird call to get the birds to come to the hunter. Either one of these approaches is actually quite fascinating. So don't just get stuck on the visual arts. Also think about the sound that ceramics can make, either as wind goes through them, or as they get knocked into one another, or as water moves through them. So don't just think of it in terms of practicality, think of it in terms of art. And of course, always when you're thinking about art, think about what that says about your culture. And you can check out my video on arts in fantasy in the information card. And then, as I mentioned, you can use clay tablets to preserve writing. In fact, that is the oldest kinds of writing that we have in our world, is on clay tablets. So if you have something like prophecy or some piece of knowledge that you want your people in the current day to have that was written down thousands of years ago, think about writing it on clay. Bear in mind that paper will perish, but clay endures, and even if it breaks, you can put the shards together to form the total picture again, as our archaeologists do today. And that in and of itself can be a fantastic story to explore within your world. And then one other use that not everybody knows about is that ceramics actually is used as armor in today's day and age. So the ceramic layer on the outer surface is called the strike face, and it's backed up by a ductile fiber reinforced plastic or metal layer. And this is actually used either as personal armor or as armor on top of a vehicle. And the purpose of the ceramic layer is to fracture the projectile or to deform the projectile nose on impact. And it erodes and slows down the projectile and distributes the impact load over a larger area. And of course, ceramic weighed less than metal for pound for pound for the protection thereof. So also think about ceramics in terms of the protection that it can offer you, especially in a world that has firearms. But this is fantasy world building. So what about magic and ceramics? There are a couple of places where I can really see ceramics playing a role in magic. First is in component magic systems, so magic systems where you require certain components. I could see you needing clay from certain specific places. I could see you needing to find a specific clay to make a specific type of ceramic that you then use in your magic. I can also see ceramic playing a role in containment magic. So if you have something like this that potentially traps the tooth fairy, you can have that as something that lures a spirit in, and then you have a maze inside of the ceramic vessel that confuses the spirit and traps them inside and forces them to do the mage's will. So that would work very well in a society where magic is driven by demonology or by spirits or even by capturing things like angels or infernals or whatever you want to put inside the ceramic container. You could also go for protection magic in ceramics. So you could go for taking that armor and then making it magical armor as well as physical armor. And then, of course, you can look towards sympathetic magic. Remember those terracotta soldiers? What if they were infused with the power to stand up and defend their emperor's grave? That would be a pretty spectacular piece of magic. Or you could make little dolls of people and, as below, so above. So you affect the doll with magic and that affects the thing that you've made. Especially given how versatile clay is, you could make a sympathetic symbol of anything. So you could make it of an animal, of the world, even of a city, and then affect that piece with a clay. And this works especially well if you then combine it with components. So you have to go gather the clay that is somehow infused with the essential identity of the thing that you are modeling in sympathetic magic. So if you're modeling a city, you have to go gather the clay from that city. If you're modeling an animal, you have to go gather the clay from the area where that animal is common, etc., etc. I think that if you're going to do a sympathetic magic system, I would definitely consider looking into using ceramics as an element of that sympathetic magic system. And of course, don't forget about using ceramics in your religion and potentially using it for divine magic. So you channel the magic of the gods through ceramics, etc. Or you infuse the spirit of the god into the little statue that you carry around your neck, and so on. And those are my thoughts on ceramics in a fantasy world. If you like this video, check out my video on spinning in a fantasy world. And if you want to connect around this or any other topic, I do have a Discord server, linked down below. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds.